Hello, I'm Joel Toppen, and this is video number 6 of our tutorial of the game Navajo Wars. It's the same tutorial that you find in the playbook of the game. What we're going to do in this video is we're going to pick up right where we left off. In our last video, video number 5, we asked that you stop and read section 10 of the rulebook, which deals with trade goods. Now what we're going to do is we're going to finish up that planning operation. We still have steps 5 and 6 to do, so let's go ahead and conduct those. Step 5 of the planning operation is really simple. At this point, we can spend an AP to do either tribal diplomacy or tribal warfare. But right now, that's really not necessary given the present game situation, so we're going to forego spending our last action point to do that. So we'll move on to step 6, and here we got to do something called reset cubes. This is dealt with in the glossary. If you look up reset cubes in the glossary, which is section 13, it'll tell you how to do this. It's really simple, and it's something you're going to have to do pretty regularly throughout the game. The first thing you do when you do a cube reset is you take all the cubes in the recovery box, or bowl, whichever way you prefer it, and you return those to the bag. So we're going to go ahead and put those back into the raid pool. Then you take everything that's in the raided cubes box and it slides down to the recovery box. So at the end of a reset cubes, the raided cubes box is going to be empty. The recovery box is going to contain what used to be in the raided cubes box. So that pretty much wraps up the operation segment. Now we have to do the major event segment. So I'm going to zoom in on this card so you can see it. The major event is called Trappers and Traders. The instruction says to roll a die, determine the territory where an intruder counter will be placed. So we're going to go ahead and roll a single die, and we'll just assume that we rolled a 5. Next thing you do is it says roll a second die roll and place the intruder counter face down into the area with value equal to the roll. Now when you place intruder counters, you're not supposed to look at them. Okay, you place them face down, but you never look at it until it's time to reveal them later on. So what we're going to do is we're going to take an intruder counter here out of play box. We're going to find area number 5, Hopi Land. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and place the intruder counter into the area that corresponds to the next die roll we made. So we made 2 die rolls. The first die roll 5 identifies the territory. The second die roll identifies the area. And remember, again, you ignore the parenthesized values unless specifically told to use them. So in this case, since we rolled a 1 and it doesn't say anything about parenthesized values, we place it into the unparenthesized area 1. If we had rolled a 6, it would go into the 6th area of Hopi Land. So that is the major event. Most of the intruder counters are beneficial to the player. The majority of the counters are good, but there are some bad things in there. What's going to happen is intruder counters will be revealed as soon as a family enters the same area, or if the intruder counter is placed by the event into the same area that contains a family. So if we had a family here in area 1 of Hopi Land, the intruder counter will be drawn randomly and placed there and then immediately revealed. But since there wasn't a family there, it's going to be face down until we move a family in there. At that point, then, we will reveal the counter. All right, so that is the major event. We go on to the minor event segment, which says to roll to see which instructions swap places. So we read about this in section 7 of the rulebook. It'll tell you exactly how to handle these minor events. But for this one, it's really easy. What we're going to do is we look at the instruction display here. You look at all the little die roll faces. We're going to roll die roll, and let's just assume that we rolled a 2. And what that means is the 2 counters here that correspond to the die roll face of 2 on the enemy instruction display are going to swap places. So the raid and the subvert instruction swap spaces. And regarding swapping spaces, you can look that up also in the glossary regarding swapping. In order for 2 counters to swap either vertically or horizontally, two spaces, either vertically or horizontally, must be occupied by a counter. There are occasions in which you'll be given the opportunity to swap counters, but let's say, for example, these two spaces are empty. If that is the case, then and we rolled a 2, since these spaces are empty, no swap would actually take place. And you might be wondering, how could that possibly happen? Well, it can happen if there is a peace instruction that's been in play or a defend New Mexico instruction that's in play. Those are the two instructions that could leave an empty space on the active column temporarily when a minor event takes place and tells you to swap those counters out. Okay, so that will conclude this card number 36. So we'll go ahead and discard it, and we'll draw the next card. Okay, and during the discard phase, one thing I should mention is during the discard phase, you should check to see if the enemy morale is at 0, then you would win at this point as the player. If the player's culture and military are both at 0 during a discard phase, then you would lose the game. At this point, it's pretty obvious that neither the enemy nor the Navajo have won, so we'll move on to the next card, which is card number 26. It's another operations card. We don't have enough action points to preempt. It says the player may preempt for 2 APs, but we only have 1. So the enemy is going to collect 3 action points, being that we were unable to preempt. So they'll collect 1, 2, 3. Okay, they also have cubes in the subjugation of New Mexico box. They have 2 cubes there, so they're going to get 2 more. And that brings their total action point available to 6. So they have 6 APs to work with this turn. Next, we have to determine which of these instructions, if any, will either swap places or flip over. Let's assume that we rolled 2 2s again. If we rolled a pair of 2s, then these counters that just swap spaces per the minor event are going to swap right back. Okay, at this point, the enemy will spend 3 APs to execute the topmost instruction, which is a colonize instruction. So we'll knock their APs down by 3. And to find out more about how the colonize instruction works, I would ask that you pause the video at this point and read rule 4.2.3. Next, you'll want to read 4.2.6. and 4.2.1. You're going to read 3 rules, and you'll understand when you read all 3 of those rules in that order. When you're finished reading, go ahead and hit play on the video, and we'll continue. Okay, if you're done reading those rules, we'll go ahead and proceed. The first thing you find out about a colonize instruction is it can turn into other instructions based on the current situation. First of all, the colonize instruction, the function of it ordinarily is to take cubes out of the rated cubes box and move them into the recovery box. What that does is it helps the New Mexico colony to recover from previous raids and some of the warfare that's taken place. Unfortunately, there are no cubes in here. Unfortunately for the enemy, I should say. There are no cubes in here, and so this instruction is going to turn into something else. As you read, if you have no cubes in the rated cubes box, you're going to treat the colonize instruction as though it said expand. So in 4.2.6, you read about the expand instruction. So what the expand instruction does is it causes enemy outposts to move upwards on these territorial tracks. So if you had an outpost, a mission outpost, say in Area 1 of Shiprock, and an expand took place, the mission would move into Area 2, and then you would also lose a culture point. Each time an outpost moves upward on an area track, then it causes the player to lose culture points. What's really scary is when you have multiple outposts on different area tracks. If you had, for example, a mission here in Shiprock and in Zuni Mountains and in San Juan Valley, all 3 of those would advance and you would lose 1 culture point for each of those outposts that moved upwards on the track. So you want to be very careful about letting the enemy build lots of outposts out on your territory. Well, in this case, there are no outposts in any of the territories, so the colonize instruction, which turned into an expand instruction, now turns into a build instruction. Just to make sure it's crystal clear, with the colonize instruction, you look at the rated cubes box. If there's no cubes in there, you treat the counter as though it were an expand instruction. You look then at all of the area tracks, and if there's no outposts anywhere on the map, on the area tracks, then you treat that instruction as though it were a build instruction. And that's what we're going to do here. With a build instruction, what you do is you place an outpost that's going to be tied to the period of the game that you're playing. For the Spanish period, you always place mission outposts. During the Mexican and American periods, you always place rancho counters. And you'll notice that the counters are color-coded to the period. Yellow for Spanish period, green for Mexican period, and blue for American period. You'll note that the rancho counters are two-tone. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take the counter and we're going to place it into area 1 of the territory that has the lowest die roll face that does not already possess an outpost of that exact type. To make that really simple for you, what that means is if we already had a mission counter in area 1 of Shiprock and we had to do a build instruction, then the next outpost would be placed into San Juan Valley because San Juan Valley does not already have a mission and the die roll face is the lowest die roll face that can receive that particular counter. So that would be the next target of the enemy's building of outposts on your territory. So that will conclude our colonize instruction. So with that done, what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and move to the next instruction. It says spend 1 to 3 action points, and we have 3 APs to spend, so they will spend all 3 of them to carry out a subvert instruction. So what I'm going to ask you to do at this point is pause for just a moment and read section 4.2.11 of the rulebook, and that will teach you how to handle subvert instructions. When you're finished reading, go ahead and hit play and we will continue the video. Okay, now that you've read about the subvert instruction, we'll go ahead and carry that out. We've already spent all of the APs. We've spent all 3 APs, but as you read, because there are fewer than 3 red cubes in the subjugation of New Mexico box, what we have to do now is we treat the subvert instruction as though it were a subjugate instruction. So what we're going to do is, because we spent 3 APs to execute this instruction, and because we're treating it as a subjugate instruction, we're going to draw 3 cubes out of the raid pool. And for purposes of this demo, we're going to assume that we drew out a white, a black, and a red. So we'll go ahead and draw out those. White, red, and black. Okay, so the black and the white ones are going to go into the recovery box, and then the red one goes into the subjugation of New Mexico box. Now that there are 3 red cubes in the subjugation of New Mexico box, you'll want to take a look at the subjugation of New Mexico table in the 3-fold charts. As you can see, there's some things that happen when a 3rd cube is placed, a 3rd red cube, I should say, is placed in the subjugation of New Mexico box. First of all, we can't remove card number 41 from the game since it's not yet in play. So we're going to go ahead and ignore that. It's still in the deck somewhere. But what we can do is flip over instruction counters A, B, and F. Notice that these are the ones with the stripe on the bottom, and this is the only time in which these counters will flip. And once they are flipped over, they never go back to their other side. Now you can see they all become very high level raids. These are very powerful raid instructions now. Next thing we got to do is we have to reset the cubes per the 3rd red cube going into the subjugation of New Mexico box. Because of that, we do a reset cubes, which causes all of these recovery cubes to go back to the raid pool. And as for this box here, there's no cubes in it, so we just leave that alone. Next thing we do is we increase the enemy's morale by 1 for putting that 3rd cube. Every time a 3rd red cube goes into that bowl, then the enemy's morale goes up by 1, showing that they have absolute dominance over the colony of New Mexico. Okay, so the enemy's out of APs, so what we're going to do now is finish up the enemy's half of the operation segment by resetting the enemy instruction display. So we'll get all of these counters and move them up. And then all of these counters move down and over. So there you have it. Okay, so now it's our turn to carry out an operation. What we're going to do here is we're going to do another planning operation. Since card number 26 has a man counter on it, what we'll do first is place a man counter into the passage of time box. So we have a man and a woman in there now. Next, we collect 3 action points, 1 for each elder on the elder display. So we go from 1 to 4. And then all of the elders slide over, making them more capable, but also more vulnerable to death. The rightmost elder, what we'll do with him is we'll try to increase our military points by 1 and decrease our culture points by 1. But let's say we rolled a 6. We needed to roll a 1 through 3, so that's going to be a failure. The middle elder tries the same thing, but he needs to roll a 1 or a 2, and he ends up rolling a 3 and fails. Finally, leftmost elder is going to try it, and he actually does roll a 2, which is a success. And so that causes our military points to go up by 1 and culture points to go down by 1. Now that our military and culture points are equal, we can't conduct that specific elder action anymore. What we're going to do now is we'll skip steps 4 and 5. We're not going to build any trade goods. We don't have any to build. And so we're going to go ahead and skip that. We're not going to do any tribal diplomacy or warfare. So we skip that. Step 6 can also be skipped. That's the reset cubes step, but there's no cubes to reset. So we'll go ahead and skip that. And so that is pretty much our half of the operation segment, and we move on to the major event. So the major event segment here for card number 26 is nasty, and there's not a lot you can do about it. Since we don't have any families in either Hopi Land or the Zuni Mountains, what's going to happen is we're going to lose 1 culture point. So we'll just move over here and drop culture from 7 down to 6. For the minor event, what we have to do is roll to see which instructions are going to swap places. The die roll for this, let's just say it was a 3, and so that causes the Ute and the peace instructions to swap places on the instruction display. So what this represents is the Spanish are stirring up the Ute to perhaps go on the warpath against our people. Okay, so we'll go ahead and discard card number 26. And we'll draw the next card off the top. And it is a ceremony card. It's our very first ceremony card, and the sequence of play for a ceremony card is very simple. You just read the card from top to bottom and do exactly what it says. Step 1 tells us to carry out an enemy way effect on all cards that are in our hand. But since we don't have any cards in our hand, we don't have to worry about that. So we'll go ahead and ignore that. We'll also ignore the instruction to reset cubes since there's no cubes to reset. Step 2 tells us to either discard this card, this particular ceremony card, or conduct the following step. We'll actually go ahead and conduct the next step, which is step 3, add 1 woman population counter to the passage of time box, and then add this card to our hand. So we'll go ahead and place a woman counter here into passage of time. And then this card here will go into our hand. Okay, so we have 1 ceremony card now in our hand. Now that this card is in our hand, we have to be mindful of 2 things. Each ceremony card has a blessing way and an enemy way effect. The blessing way effect is basically the equivalent to making a die roll. If you look at the card carefully, it says that you can use this card, you can discard this card in lieu of making a die roll during a battle. So if you're in a battle situation, when it says you're supposed to make a die roll either for yourself or for the enemy, you can, instead of making a die roll, discard this card, and the die roll is automatically whatever die roll face is on the particular ceremony card that you discarded. You can also discard instead of making a die roll at any time during a player operation segment. So that's really important to understand. You can't use this during an enemy operation segment, only during a player operation segment. You can't use it during a major or minor event segment, only during a player operation segment or during a battle, regardless of whose operation segment that takes place in, or when trying to evade, regardless of what operation segment or what phase of the game that takes place in. So the only time that you can discard this card instead of making a die roll, when it's not the player's operation segment, is during a battle or during evasion. That's the only exception to the general rule that you can discard this card only during the player operation segment. The enemy way effect on this particular card is to place additional intruder counters down, and again, that might be good, it might be bad, but some of the ceremony cards you want to read the enemy way effect very carefully, because if you draw another ceremony card, then all of the ceremony cards that are in your hand, each enemy way effect will be triggered, and some of them are quite devastating. All right, so we went ahead and took card 40 into our hand, so we'll draw our next card. And this card is card number 15. It's an operations card. It's always a good idea to kind of look over the whole card before you decide to do anything. And on this card, you'll notice that the major event segment says that if planning operation is executed, then during the major event segment, you get to look at the next 3 cards in the deck, and you can rearrange them in any order desired and place them back on the top of the deck. So it gives you a chance to kind of peer into the future and kind of shape the future, if you will. So that's a really, really good event to take. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do this. We're going to spend 3 APs to preempt. So let's go down here and drop our APs 1, 2, 3 down to 1. So that'll allow us to preempt. We'll go first here, and what we'll do is another planning operation. The card has an elder on it, so we'll put an elder counter into the passage of time box. We will collect 3 APs, so the APs go right back up to 4. Each of our elders slide over 1 box, and then we do a special elder action with each of our elders. So what elder actions do we want to do here? We'll go ahead and take the rightmost elder, and we're going to try to add APs to our stock here. So what we'll do here is we'll roll a die, and let's assume that our die roll is a 4, which is enough. So we'll increase our APs from 4 to 5. The middle elder will try the same thing. He rolls, let's say he rolls a 1, and so the APs go from 5 all the way up to 6. And then the leftmost elder will attempt to decrease the ferocity of family C. And the reason you'll want to do this will become apparent later. Essentially what happens is, as your ferocity goes up, it's harder for you to evade, but it also adds strength to enemy raids coming from Santa Fe. And as you can see, there is an enemy raid poised to come after us. So we'll go ahead and try to use him to decrease the ferocity of that particular family. So we go ahead and roll a die, and let's just say we roll a 2, which is a success. And so we'll go ahead and decrease the ferocity down to 0. So the ferocity will go down 1 level. All right, that's all of our elder actions. We'll skip step 4 once again. We won't build any trade goods. We don't have any to build. We will, in step 5, attempt tribal diplomacy. And we have to spend 1 AP for one of our families with a man to conduct this. We'll enable the man from family B here to actually do the negotiation with the Ute tribe. So we dropped our APs from 6 down to 5. Our target is got to be an instruction here somewhere on the enemy instruction display in the active column, and so obviously we target the Utes right here. You might want to look at the tribal diplomacy table. This particular table is found on the tribal raid flowchart. It's on the single flowchart that says tribal raid flowchart. On the bottom of the tribal raid flowchart, you'll see the tribal diplomacy table. Since family B has an evasion modifier of +2, you can see that right up here. Since family B has an evasion modifier of +2, our attempted diplomacy is going to succeed on a die roll of 4 or higher. We can spend up to all of our trade goods to increase our chances, but I'm feeling lucky, so we'll go ahead and we'll hold on to our card. Now we could, dump this card right here, but we'll just go ahead and hold on to that for now. Our die roll for diplomacy, let's just say it's a 6, it succeeds. And so now we need to determine what counter on the standby column that the Utes are going to swap places with. So because the tribal diplomacy was successful, we roll a die and we look at what counter on the standby column matches the die roll face, and that's the one it's going to swap places with. We'll go ahead and roll die, and let's assume that we rolled a 4. Well, if you look at the 4 column, that's the Comanche instruction. So that's kind of like going out of the frying pan into the fire, because the Comanche are a little bit more tough than the Ute in battle. So that's really unfortunate. But hold on a second, we do have trade goods. So what we could do is use our trade goods for a reroll. So what we're going to do here to rectify this is that we're not going to accept that die roll there. It's still the player operations segment. Okay, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to spend all 3 trade goods to force a reroll. And instead of chancing, a 1 in 6 chance that we're going to roll another 4, what we're going to do instead is I'm going to take the card, the ceremony card, out of our hand, and we will discard this. And so instead the Comanche is going to stay put, and what that will cause is the Ute and the peace counter to swap places, because peace was on the 3 row of the standby column. So I hate to use trade goods for that, but that's just the way it rolls sometimes. So there we go. That will end the 5th step of our planning operation. Step 6, we skip it again because there's no cubes in the rated cubes box or the recovery box. And so now it's the enemy's turn to act. So the enemy is going to collect a bunch of APs here. First, they're going to collect 4 from the operations card because we preempted, and then 3 more for the subjugation of New Mexico box. So that's a total of 7 APs that they will collect. Next, barring a roll of snake eyes here, the enemy's going to have to just pass because they don't have enough action points in their stock here to take on that topmost instruction. So we're going to hold our breath here and make 2 die rolls, and let's say we roll a 1 and a 3. And so we can flip counter number 3 here on the active column, but the counter on column number 1 does not flip because it does have the red stripe on it. Since the enemy lacks the APs to act this turn, it's going to save its 7 APs for the next turn. Now, since we carried out a planning operation, what we get to do now is look at the topmost cards here on the deck. So I'm going to go ahead and just spread them out here on the map so you can see what we got here. All right, couple operation cards and a ceremony card. So doing the math, we know that the 4th card down will be card number 41, the Pueblo Revolt, the historic event. So what we're going to do here is we're going to reorder these cards. So the next card to be pulled will be card number 8, followed by card number 21, and then card 24. So let me zoom in here so you can see what I'm talking about. All right, so what we want to do here is we want to have the very next card be card number 8. We want to pull this one next, and then we want to pull card 21 after it, and 24 last. So we'll put that one back on top, that one on top of it, and this one we'll just go ahead and leave ready to draw in just a moment, since it's going to be drawn in just a second here. All right, so that is the major event. That gave us a lot of intel. It actually told us the next 4 cards, because you know that since you've gone through, if you've gone through 8 cards, you know card number 9 has got to be that historic card. So that was a good intel operation there. Next, we got to roll to see which instructions swap place. We've seen quite a few of those now. So we'll go ahead and make another die roll, and let's just say we roll a 3 here. Oh, don't you hate that? That means the Ute and the build swap places again. So those Ute just do not want to go away. All right, so card number 15 is then discarded. Our next card draw obviously would be the ceremony card here. And what we'll go ahead and do is, since we know that there's not going to be any more ceremony cards, at least through the next 3 draws, what we'll go ahead and do is we'll take this card into our hand, and we will add a child counter per the ceremony card. We'll go ahead and add that to the passage of time, and we'll add this card to our hand. Hopefully that will come in useful here. So we'll draw the next card off the deck. And this is another operations card. We're going to spend 2 APs to preempt. Drop APs from 5 down to 3. And this time we'll do a take actions operation. We have 3 elders on the elder display and a family in the Canyon de Chelly, so potentially we could activate 4 families, but we only have 3 on the map, so we'll activate each of them. We'll start with family A, who's going to have 7 movement points, and the reason for that is each of their population spaces in the family box are occupied, so that's 6 movement points. They have a horses counter, and because of the horsemanship level 1 culture card, that gives them +1 more. So they're going to have a total of 7 movement points. So we'll put the MP's counter here on the 7. What we're going to do with this guy for the first action that family A is going to take is we're going to go ahead and raid New Mexico. This is going to cost us 3 APs. 1 for this area here. We're using the parenthesized value because we do have a horse, and the raid on New Mexico action does allow us to use that parenthesized value. So that's going to be 1, 2, 3 to raid New Mexico, and remember once again the counter does not actually move. So we'll adjust the movement points down 1, 2, 3 down to 4, and we'll go ahead and pull a cube, and let's just assume that we pulled a yellow cube out. So we're going to draw out a specific yellow cube, and if you look at the chart for the raid on New Mexico, you'll find that we will actually be able to take a child counter out of the out of play and put it into the passage of time box. Family A's ferocity will be increased by 1, so the ferocity is going to go up to 2. Family A will now spend 1 movement point to move to area 2 of Shiprock. So we'll adjust our movement points down to 3. And it's going to spend 1 movement point to move to area 1 of the San Juan Valley. And its next movement point there, final to area 3. So that is all of family A's movement. What we're going to do with family B is we're going to activate them, put their movement points counter on the 6th spot because they don't have a horses counter, but all of their population spaces are filled on their family box. So they're going to get 6 movement points, but we want to get rid of that mission. So what we're going to do with these guys is we're going to activate them, and we're going to move them to destroy that outpost down here. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and stop this video at this point, and I'm going to ask you to read Rule 3.2.6 from the rule book before loading the next video.